Hello and welcome to this episode of DC, a Jazz City. I'm your host, Sumter. We are here on location at the District Wharf in conversation with Grammy Award winning founding Blackbirds member Kevin Toney, talking about the iconic legend, Andrew White. Kevin, it's so good to see you.
And it's good to see you. Good to be here. And what an occasion we are celebrating. Andrew White's legacy in music. Couldn't get any
Absolutely.
better than that.
Couldn't get any
Yes,
better than that.
yes.
And you know, I met you here in DC. You're living in California now, but DC was your home for many years.
Absolutely.
How has DC really played a role in your life?
Very significant. I became of age not only as a boy to a man, but also musically. I came of age here. I really was able to develop and hone everything that makes me who I am now. It was the basis. Coming here, first of all, studying with Donald Byrd. I came from Detroit,
yes,
Michigan.
the great Donald Byrd.
The great Donald Byrd, who also went to my high school. In fact, that's the reason why I came to Washington, D.C., Howard University, to study with Donald. And so everything came together from there, from working with Donald, working with the musicians that he had. I was like a kid in the candy store. And meeting all the musicians who I met in Washington, D.C., Marshall Hawkins, Reuben Brown.
Reuben Brown.
Was one of my early mentors, Used to go, love to hear him play. He took me under his wings. Andrew White. Did I mention Marshall Hawkins? I think I did. The bassist Marshall Hawkins, meeting Keith Kilgo, and meeting Keith's father, who was very instrumental, who just gave me a connection of past pianists and musical. So I became of age here. Everything, I hone everything.
Well, you came here, you went to Howard University, you're from Detroit.
Yes.
Were you already aware of Andrew White? How did you get hip to him?
No, I had no idea. Andrew was not on my radar. I got hip to Andrew. Well, it's funny. Andrew found me first, I believe. He came to one of the gigs I was playing in town at a club, probably the top of the Foolery, and he heard me play. The top of the Foolery.
And where was that?
That was on Pennsylvania Avenue. There used to be a jazz club upstairs, like when I came here in the early 70s. And so my first recollection of Andrew is he heard me play, and I think he drove me home that night, where I was staying at in Upper Northwest. And he was talking to me, and then somehow or another he asked me to play with his band. Actually, I think the first thing I did with him was recorded his album Passion Flower. So I didn't really know about him. I know once I heard him play, wow, I said, wow, I'm glad to be doing this with this guy. He was at a high level, but he was a continuation of what I was listening to in high school. I was listening to Coltrane. I was listening to Miles Davis. And so getting with Andrew and playing his music, wow, I was connected in the stream to where I knew I wanted to go at. And that was my first introduction to Andrew White.
Well, it was the brilliance that you had on the stage the other night, you paid such great homage to Andrew. Tell us a little bit about that performance and tell our audience who was on that gig.
Yes. It couldn't have been any better than that to honor Andrew. Let's see, where do I begin? First of all, in putting all this music together for the last 2 months, I went through a process of deciding, what music to play. First of all, myself, Steve Novosel on bass, and Keith Kilgo on drums. Let's start with those guys. They were our rhythm section the other day for the concert. And we had recorded and performed together on 16 of Andrew's records. Now, Andrew's music Andrew has about 60 recordings in his catalog. And they are mixed genre. He has a lot of jazz stuff, but we're on 16 albums, and most of them are live, some of them are studio. So I knew, first of all, that I wanted to have those musicians a part of it, and that it would make sense for us to do the music that we recorded on. So everything that was performed were from the music that we performed on. So it became, in a sense, a reunion. It was a reunion of the rhythm section. And as I think about this, I saw Andrew in the top of 2020, right before the pandemic. And I visited him at his home, and we had a great time. And he was kicking up a storm listening to these music, to the records we did. Andrew was just quite a character, right? Even at his home. And so I said, Andrew, you know what, man, we're going to have a reunion one day with this. So, and he said, yeah, that would be good. So yesterday, Thursday, was bittersweet in a sense.
Yes.
Of course, the sweetness of it is that we get to celebrate Andrew's music, and we had this reunion.
And you did just that. We all
and
got to be part of that celebration.
we celebrated it with him. The only missing link was him not physically being there, but we knew that his spirit was there. So in addition to Keith and Steve, we had doing the saxophones, because Andrew, as a jazz musician, is a saxophonist. We can talk about his other things that he did, the other instruments, but as a jazz musician, he was a saxophonist extraordinaire, virtuoso, a man into his own self, right? So we had Antonio Parker on alto.
His mentee.
Yes, his mentee, I understand. So it was so fitting for Antonio to be there. Antonio, all the guys did a great job. I mean, I just finished sending a text to them, letting them know how awesome everybody was.
And having Marcus Strickland.
Marcus Strickland was our guest saxophonist on tenor. Now, from the beginning, when you and I talked about we're going to put this together, I began to think again, how would I present this?
Yes.
And so Andrew played both alto and tenor. And in my mind, he's equally yoked on all of those. Play the hell out of all of them. So I thought it would be interesting to have someone play the tenor songs, or have a tenor saxophonist and an alto, to give us some variety and to give us something to work with. And so that's kind of like how everything came together. And again, it was a labor of love selecting. Oh, wow. I think my first list was 40 songs. I had 40 songs that I was going to choose from. And so I was able to get that down to about, I would say, 16 tunes.
That just speaks to Andrew's volume
Absolutely.
Of compositions. And, I want to talk a little bit about the JFK Quintet.
Sure.
And I know that Keith Kilgo, your fellow Blackbirds bandmate, was his father, was
Yes.
the pianist
Yes.
for the JFK Quintet. And he frequently accompanied Andrew after that time.
Yes.
Did you ever get to talk to Harry about his experiences with the quintet and with Andrew?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. First of all, the JFK Quintet stands for John Fitzgerald Kennedy, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So that the listeners are fully aware of that connection. Harry didn't talk to me a lot about that. Now, I talked to Andrew, and they told me bits and pieces, both Andrew and Harry. Now, I met Harry when I met Keith, and Harry he was like a second father to me here, once Keith and I got together, because he would take me under his wings. But here's what Harry did do for me, though. Harry gave me a link to, he said, look, he set me down and said, you got to listen to Wynton Kelly. You have to listen to Red Garland.
Ooh.
You've got to listen to so many pianists that I needed to fill in the blanks to my lineage. Hank Jones, he turned me on to Hank Jones. I knew of Art Tatum and a host of others. So Harry Kilgo was an important link to me in terms of exposing me to the records and what I needed to do. And so I soaked those things in.
Wow.
I knew that he played with the JFK, and that was wonderful.
So how did you first meet Andrew? What was the very first encounter? You mentioned that he drove, when you first met him, that you drove,
Yes.
that he took you home. Was that the first time that you
I
met?
believe so. As I think about that, there's one or two things that happened. I know for sure he heard me play at a club.
Okay.
And I still wasn't familiar with him. I think some of the guys in D.C. had told me, Andrew White, you got to meet him or something. I was beginning to hear things about him, but he still wasn't on my radar. And then when he came to hear me play, I can almost see it now that he came up to me with his glasses and smiling, and he was he said, hey, he asked me to play with him at some point, really soon. And and then I remember him giving me his music, and then the first couple of gigs that I played with him, he would always drive me home because where I stayed at was near him. So I had conversations with him, and he was like a big brother. He was like a big musical brother to me. And I just, knew that this guy was smart. He played the heck out of saxophone. I had no idea as to the depth of Andrew's musical world, that he was self-publishing, he was self-producing. I had no idea of that aspect of him until later into the relationship, when I was able to see all those things, and he would share those things with me and his philosophy about business, music, and life.
Because in fact, in September of 1971, he started Andrew's Music. He was quite the entrepreneur.
Yes.
I remember overhearing many conversations at Howard of him schooling younger musicians about the importance of entrepreneurship and owning your own. He actually had self-produced albums by mail order.
Yes.
Back then, and he would do transcriptions of John Coltrane, Eric Dolphy, and even Charlie Parker.
And even Charlie Parker, right. And by the way, Andrew celebrates this year on September 23rd, and he always had it, he had it strategically planned because on September 23rd is John Coltrane's birthday.
Okay.
So he made the launch of his company specifically for that day. And so this year, he would celebrate 50 years of Andrew's Musical Enterprises.
Fantastic. Can you tell us what you think the significance is of his transcription?
It's documentation. When we, particularly as musicians, and then even particularly as African American musicians, when we document our work and transcribes it through transcriptions, then it becomes historical record and historical documents. The reason why composers like Bach, Beethoven, all the classical composers, why they're great and why we still play their music and we still play it exactly like they have it, is because it was documented. So for Andrew to take John Coltrane, who was and probably still is the leading direction of saxophone, even 50 years after his death, he is still up here in terms of the bar. If you get this bar and beyond, then you're playing at the best. And so that's what Andrew exhibited. So it's extremely important that not only Andrew did the transcriptions of Coltrane, which speaks to his brilliance of being able to hear that stuff in the first place. Because Train was off the chain. The things that Train was hearing, people are still trying to figure that out. Our greatest musicians are still trying to figure out, what was that? What is that? So it's very significant.
I think so. I would absolutely agree.
I'd like to say one more thing, if I could add to that, about the transcription. So let's note that Andrew was also far beyond the transcriptions. The transcriptions, as great as they are only the tip of the iceberg to what he did and to his compositions that he wrote. Andrew White's Enterprises has over 3,000 products of arrangements, transcriptions, treaties,
that's impressive.
Arrangements of not only his small band, but big band. He's got saxophone quintet, saxophone octet, orchestral music, vocal music. I mean, Andrew White is the complete consummate composer. And what we did the other night, as great as it was, and as special as it was only the tip of the iceberg for Andrew. And we are just hopeful that what we're doing here, this conversation, will open up. He will not be unsung soon.
Well, when I think about Andrew White, I think about the scene in D.C. how he would go around town and sit in. He'd be sitting in the back, just listening. Wouldn't say much. And in fact, you didn't know what he was thinking about the DC scene.
Hmm.
But I think he did have a lot of respect for the generational aspects of jazz in this town.
Okay.
When you think about DC as a jazz town, how significant do you think it is for this city to the contribution of jazz music overall?
I think DC, in the scheme of DC being a jazz hub, a major jazz capital, it is up there. I mean, there's New York. I think there's got to be New York. There's Philly, but New York, DC is up
We're
there in the
right up
top
there.
three. No, we
Yes,
are.
we are.
Again, there's been so many great musicians that have come from DC. I mean, let's go back to Duke Ellington.
Yes, go back to Duke
Let-
Ellington.
let-
Shirley Horn.
Shirley Horn. In terms
Sonny
of
Stitt.
Sonny Stitt, I think Billy Taylor had residency
Yes,
here.
he did.
And on and on. And then, this just was a hub where musicians historically, from the early origins of jazz, from the 30s and 40s particularly, this is a hotbed. People come here and play at the Bohemian Caverns and all those things. So when I came here, I was at the tail end of that, but I was at the beginning of something new and different, playing with Andrew, playing with Donald Byrd, the Blackbirds, and the history that we created and stuff. And so really, Donald Byrd and the Blackbirds history is really DC history.
That's
even though
DC history.
even though it's
I
national,
think, I think that's a really,
it is a
thank you for
DC
saying
story.
that, because it is a DC story.
Howard University, we're full-time students there, playing with our professor,
And Donald
traveling
Byrd,
around the
he
world.
came here and he got really grounded in this city.
Yes, he
So-
loved the city.
Oh yes, oh yes.
And he loved Andrew. And you know what? For me personally, let me just make a personal link between Andrew and Donald Byrd. The performing with both of them were my formative years, and they both complemented each other. So when I was not with Donald Byrd or in the Blackbirds recording, I did all these Andrew White things. And Andrew used to come when he was on the road playing bass, he would come to some of the Blackbird gigs and hang out with us. And Donald knew of him, and Donald knew we were making these records with him. But I know that Donald was really proud of us to be able to have that versatility
Right.
to not only play what we were doing, the commercial jazz and that whole different thing. And then with Andrew, we're playing just straight ahead, anything you can imagine.
Anything that you can imagine.
Anything you imagine
That is
with Andrew White.
absolutely Andrew White.
And that's one of the beauty about Andrew too, that we could say, working with him as a sideman, but also working with him, is that he allowed me to develop and be all that I could be. There were no limitations on what I needed to play. Now, true, Andrew being the academic musician he was, everything was written out. A lot of his stuff was written out. Chord voicings. They were more than just chord changes. So I mean, Andrew would give you a piano score or a drum score or bass score. So you had to have the academic background to hang with him. But beyond the paper and into the improvisational aspects of jazz, it's like, take me somewhere.
Right.
And I used to love every journey that we did. And I hope and part of that essence I wanted to bring out on our concert.
And you did.
The joy of the adventure of
essence.
jazz.
Yes, the joy, the adventure of jazz, the brilliance of
Yes.
jazz, the sophistication, the intricacy of jazz. It was all there, and it was incredibly enjoyable.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure walking down memory lane with you,
Yes,
talking about
yes.
your good friend, Andrew White.
Good friend, mentor, big brother. I'd like to say one other thing on a personal note about Andrew, just to share with you another thing that was so important to both my wife Phyllis and I. Andrew was at our marriage, our wedding, and Andrew, not only did he give the first toast and the speech, but his gift to us was a reed of John Coltrane's, which I treasure to the day. That was his gift to us. I mean, who gives you that?
And
But I mean, John
you
Coltrane's
knew
practice reed.
That was a treasure. He wanted.
It's like giving us a torch.
Yes. Oh yes.
To carry on good in marriage and carry on to the highest level in music. So that I say thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew White.
Yes.
Thank you, Kevin Toney.
Yes.
So we'll look forward to talking more. And we've got a jazz fest going on, so we're going to go and hear some great music throughout the festival. You've been tuning into DC, a Jazz City, again with my dear friend Kevin Toney. I'm Sunny Sumter. We'll be back for another episode real soon.